a great tactic, really. But authoritarianism in the brain, structural MR correlates associated with polarized left and right-wing ideological traits. So let's have a quick overview of this, and then we'll look into some of the details here.
Oh my God, a new study on the brains of authoritarians. We have to talk about this.
This is a TikToker who is actually like a neuroscientist.
Right-wing authoritarians have less volume in the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex, and they have greater negative urgency. Negative urgency is the tendency to...
We knew that already. We know that a lot of, generally not even like right-wing people, but people who are reactionary have lower volume in their prefrontal cortex because that controls impulses. And this is psychology 100% relates to politics, and it bothers me that we don't talk about it as much. You need to combine the psychological and the sociological analysis with the analysis of the material conditions.
To act rashly when distressed. The authors link this negative urgency to, quote, dogmatic, intolerant attitudes aimed at protecting one's identity and security, as well as aggressive behavioral tendencies. Now, the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex, what does that do? It is involved with fear and anxiety information processing. Oh my God, that one. Integrating social impressions, empathy, altruism, theory of mind, which is basically the ability to understand somebody else's way of thinking and feeling. Complex decision making. Processing a sense of self, which is perhaps why right-wingers are less self-aware. Morality judgments.
Scientifically lacking empathy, morality, cognitive ability.
And top-down motor cortex inhibition. So you see how all the pieces come together, right? More anxiety and more fear without the emotional intelligence to properly deal with it. Connected to...
Which is why it works so well to propagandize to these people from the right's perspective of constant fear-mongering and hate. It's just everything is coming to kill you and take everything you love, and you should hate the people that are responsible for it. Here they are. Look at them. Look how much you hate them. Look how much you're afraid of them. And that, from the beginning of the day all the way until you go to bed, will make you literally insane.
You have to live my way, the way that I'm familiar with, or you're a threat style thinking, which is in part due to the inability to understand people who are different, and then acting rashly and aggressively towards that perceived threat. It's like that saying, when you have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. When your brain is more often in fight or flight mode, everything seems like a threat. The authors...
This is why they're slashing education. Your prefrontal cortex develops during adolescence.
Also looked into left-wing authoritarianism and the anti-hierarchical aggression that they define as being part of left-wing authoritarianism, correlated negatively with a cortical thickness cluster in the right anterior insula, and left-wing authoritarian tendencies broadly correlated with anxiety. So again, we see anxiety and fear connected with authoritarian tendencies. Now, the insula might be familiar because of this video, where in fact greater activity in the insula correlated with progressive views, which is the opposite of what we find with the left-wing authoritarianism. Its functions include compassion, empathy, taste, perception, motor control, self-awareness. We see this pop up again.
Can we acknowledge that, the fact that...
of what we find with the left-wing authoritarianism. Its functions include compassion, empathy,
taste, and perception are all better on the left.
Taste, perception, motor control.
Motor control, also better on the left.
Self-awareness, we see this pop up again. Cognitive functioning.
Cognitive functioning. Shocking to me that leftists have a higher ability to... function cognitively. Clearly I don't, but, you know, general leftists do.
Interpersonal experience. And awareness of homeostatic emotions such as hunger, pain, and fatigue. So
that one threw me off, though. The homeostatic emotions such as hunger and fatigue. It is very funny that we scientifically have data that shows that we have better taste than the right. So no wonder right-wingers make terrible food. No wonder that these people have no joy, Shard. This is revolutionary right here. The fact that we can prove that they have no taste and that they are miserable people. And part of that is from fear, but they have no joy because of it. Wait, so like leftism is associated with the taste as in deliciousness or taste as in like style and discernment? Both. Sundry Konkar. I mean, like, taste is in the secondary there, the latter, but the former also makes sense. Deliciousness, food is science. It's like chemistry to cook. And it's also kind of an art form. And we know that the right can't do art or science, so also makes sense why libertarians in the US can't fucking cook. You repeat yourself. Those are the same as the right.
So funny enough, in this way, left-wing authoritarians have an overlap with people on the right, which I think affirms my interpretation of the data, which is that left-wing authoritarianism doesn't really exist. It is in fact an off-branch of right-wing authoritarianism.
I agree with this, by the way. This is why I often say, and I get pushback from this, of there's no such thing as leftists who are authoritarian, because if they're authoritarian, then they're not actually leftists. And you can see that in the data.
It's just accompanied by left-wing sounding talking points. Because you can't be authoritarian and anti-hierarchy.
Yeah, those two things are 100% conflicting. So, I'm going to link the two studies in chat so you guys can have a look for yourselves. They don't like change, and simple familiar things aren't scary, though this does clash with my mom being a socialist and hating the concept of flavor, and my former Republican dad liking spicy shit. Well, obviously, like, it's not everybody, and brains are weird, but this is a general correlation. It's also not causation, it's correlation. So, authoritarianism in the brain, structural MR correlates associated with polarized left and right-wing ideology. Throw me into methodology first. So 100 volunteers in this study, which is not a particularly large sample size, but from what I've seen, they did this in several different variants of testing, like, I mean, using full brain scans, of doing both CT, MR, and VBM plus. Okay, yeah, absolutely. I have it all in the Obsidian doc. And the second here is it's from 2020. I think we've shown this one on stream before, in that how different political attitudes are impacted by neurological factors. Previously, like, I have talked about how cortisol, a hormone that's produced when you're stressed out, can genuinely just cause damage to your brain, especially if it's regular stress. I mean, like, if you're constantly over and over and over and over again feeling this, it does definitely have an effect here. So, structured MRI links authoritarian attitudes to specific brain regions. Shrinkage in gray matter, social reasoning deficits on the right-wing authoritarian side, the right anterior insula thinning equals empathy, impulse control issues on the left-wing authoritarian side, but that does also exist on the right, because both show examples of it, because there's actually only right-wing authoritarianism. So both camps share impulsivity, dogmatic, prejudiced, and pro-censorship views in some cases, as well as the progressives boost cognitive flexibility, emotional regulation, empathy, free speech framing. Right-wingers have shrinkage, truly shocking. Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, this is a produced effect, right? It's not just a genetic thing. I mean, in fact, I would go so far as to say it's not at all a genetic thing, that it's only an environmental thing, because you're not just born stupid. No one's born, innately anything. You might be born with a predisposition to reactionary thinking, and that might make it easier for you to go down this road, but not guaranteed in any possible way. So, community and campus participants, psychometrics, used like the Barrett impulsivity test and whatnot, all these things. You can have a actual look at all that. But the dorso-medial prefrontal cortex volume, moral judgment and perspective, taking behaviors, thoughts, all of these dropped on the right-wing authoritarian side. Now we're going to compare and contrast both the left and the right, but before that, I just do want to address that anxiety, trauma, both 100% tie into these authoritarian traits, whether you're from the left or from the right, to begin with, which, by the way, means that a leftist who's not already authoritarian can become authoritarian through a experience of trauma, an experience of anxiety and high stress. And I think that is pretty easily demonstrated by looking at people like Anna Kasparian. She used to be progressive, and she's now a right-wing, a left-leaning right authoritarian. Fetterman literally has brain damage in his dorsomedial prefrontal cortex. Like, that's exactly where his brain damage is. So, yes, Fetterman as well. Now, Trump is just like a different story of this. It's a long-term buildup of that. Oh, what's up, Dan? Ditso? Just passing by. Is that neuroscience? It is indeed. Either you're looking at a short-term, immediate change in brain function in either, again, the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex or, what was it? The insula. There we go. The anterior insula. It makes a pretty big difference. So, high anxiety. And trait anxiety is different because trait anxiety is anxiety that you are predisposed to genetically. Are we psychoanalyzing today? We are. And what we're psychoanalyzing are these two links, long live Homo sapien, from chat. And these show that there is a physical difference in the minds of authoritarians, whether they're left or right. I could see it being from cortisol buildup in Trump, from his trash dad and being forced to run a business. Exactly, and that's what I mean. When you're talking about a long-term buildup of the cortisol from that stress, from that trauma, from having a shit parent, it leads to long-term authoritarian behaviors, whether or not you have that trait anxiety or whether your anxiety comes from behavioral, or rather, environmental factors. So, other than that, though, early trauma, as we said, can rewire the brain's stress circuits, heightening vigilance, lowering the baseline of trust. And then, on top of that, chronic stress reinforces cognitive rigidity. Think about chronic stress when it comes to the left much more and how people on the left can get radicalized to the right. Because part of the idea of the capitalist society that we exist in is to produce chronic stress. They want you to be that way anyway. Whether or not it's for this purpose or not, it just has a dual use purpose there. Moral absolutism definitely makes things worse. And chronic anxiety and trauma lead to amygdala activation and can reduce dorsomedial prefrontal cortex. No study has proven causation, correlation only, but these are well-documented risk factors, and therapeutic interventions such as trauma care, informed resilience building, lower authoritarian appeals. So literally therapy makes it harder for this to happen. It's like, this is stuff that we've known for a long time, but it is really nice to see data on the subject that, like, continues to show that it is true. I respect that what I said is barely a step up from phrenology, but I do stand by it. It's very much a step up from phrenology, though, because phrenology is not based in anything that's actually causing anything. Like, it's just bullshit. There's not even correlative data for phrenology for the most part. Aside from, like, dead eyes, this is just genetics and social structures, as well as, like, nature and nurture all coming together. So, shared psychological traits, though, before we get to specifically the left-wing authoritarians and the right-wing authoritarians, is impulsivity under distress. When you are stressed out, if you want to drink, if you want to do drugs, if you act out, if you go shopping, these are impulsive actions that people do to cope with distress. Dogmatism, people who are unwilling to engage with disagreements, people who are unwilling to change their positions, people who are unwilling to even listen to other people's positions. Prejudices versus rivals. Surprise, surprise. Being a racist makes it, or, just any kind of prejudice makes it more likely for you to be an authoritarian. And support for censorship does also make you more likely to be an authoritarian. Substances are a big unconscious cope. Yeah, they're like the biggest unconscious cope. So, going from left to right, I suppose, One of the factors that leads to higher amounts of authoritarianism on the left is anti-hierarchical aggression, hostility towards hierarchies and traditional power, sometimes punitively. Eat the rich, bring up the guillotines, that kind of language does have a correlation with left-wing authoritarians. Top-down censorship, support for silencing dissent, and deemed harmful or unjust. I disagree here, because, I don't think that it's censorship to support silencing harmful dissent. And by this, I mean, you shouldn't be able to say lies on television if you are an elected official or a newscaster. This is technically censorship, but it is harmful and it is unjust. And it creates less censorship through enacting censorship, because by censoring that harmful media, you open the door to quite a lot more to take its place that is not harmful. But, that's nuance, and a lack of ability to do nuance is one of the factors here for authoritarianism. And rigid moral certitude in a singular, usually progressive moral vision. Yeah, I mean, think about this in the context of liberals who just hate the left, actual leftists. Really, I think a lot of this applies to liberals that then become right-wing authoritarians. They're not actually left-wing. The left-wing authoritarianism from leftists is just red fascism. And the liberals are the ones that are actually being brought over through these means, because these means aren't bringing over the leftists. They got brought over through these means already. All of this already made them authoritarians. They just sound a bit to the left, and then these factors are what then bring over more people to their end, pretending to be the left. Now, right-wing authoritarians, they are submissive. They have deference to perceived legitimate authority. By the way, it's very funny to call right-wingers submissive. It makes them very mad. And you can see that in authoritarian aggression, willingness to harm those labeled as threats by authority. They do love to get mad, especially when you question not only them, but their authority. Believe it or not, I used to be a mildly conservative libertarian back 12 years ago. I've been watching some of their podcasts recently and tried to tap back into that mindset just to see how it operates today. You being a mildly conservative libertarian 12 years ago and then growing out of it probably comes from a place of not having the issues that these people do, in inability to cope with your trauma, in inability to cope with your anxiety, a chronic amount of it, a chronic amount of stress. Also, you clearly have higher cognitive functioning than the average right-winger does. Conventionalism, a strong attachment to tradition and norms, often very clear on the right, as we see with, Make America Christian again, Make America this again or that again. Everything's back how it used to be. There is no let's make it better than it was before. Can truth be regarded as subjective in this context? Absolutely. There is some objective truths in this, but a lot of truths are subjective. For example, it is a objective truth that there is a correlation between reduced gray matter in the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex as well as the anterior insula in authoritarian behaviors and traits. And that there is objectively a truth in that there is a tie-in when it comes to emotional distress, particularly anxiety and trauma and anger and fear. But the specific things that we take from that are subjective. You were educated and also a minority, so statistical odds, I wasn't lasting long on the right. Yeah, probably. Although, they have plenty of minorities now. Remember, we got multicultural Nazism now. Motives: fear of disorder, threat sensitivity, and a desire for stability. They don't want change. They are sensitive to anything that they consider different, because different is a threat in their mind. And they don't like things not going the way that they plan to. Disorder, chaos, surprises, really. And as well as the lower gray matter volume in the left anterior cingulate cortex, which is tied to lower cognitive flexibility and weaker conflict monitoring. So they're like changing their mind is harder, as well as them actually understanding what they're arguing about is also much weaker. They don't even know what they're arguing about, and you can't change their mind. It's like you don't even need the study to see it. Like, we've known this shit for so long. They display all of these traits. A larger right amygdala associated with heightened threat reactivity and vigilance. This is also generally true for anyone who suffers like extended amounts of trauma. Other people said that this too in different settings. Like, yeah, you can see that, by the way, on the left authoritarians as well, because they are also on the right, that there is a inability for like your average tanky to change their mind, and there's also an inability for them to understand what they're arguing about. The brain matter from exercise / lack of exercising these things. Well, yeah, you exercising critical thinking is exercising your brain like a muscle, and it grows your ability to not fall into these patterns, to cope with trauma and anxiety, to not be as reactive. And again, like the shared psychological traits with the liberals generally, who then become left-leaning authoritarians, or just the leftist like authoritarians who are red fascists, is impulsivity under distress, dogmatism, prejudice versus rivals, and support for censorship. One thing that I can recall is being on the right carries heavy main character, mythological, personal narrative syndrome. Life is about your journey, so the sense of rules staying the same and important for people like that, and the sense of anyone breaking the rules is mind-breaking, because the rules are like what we base this web through, which you and your main character journey, you start to default trust authority, easily have no issues with authoritarianism. And actually, that's 100% visible here too, in that there is a correlation with narcissism. And that everything is about me, my personal narrative, mythological story. That's a narcissistic trait. It's not necessarily even narcissism, but just narcissistic traits does increase that. And then you also see like increases in black and white thinking, emerging from rapid social change or backlash against perceived systemic oppression, at least on the left side, and often targets outgroups and minorities, more prevalent in context of social and economic instability on the right side. But I mean, we've seen exactly this play out on the right, as well as them targeting minorities. America's narcissistic society? Yo, absolutely. That's 100% true, because everyone in America considers their neighbors like the enemy. My house is my castle. It's the hyper-individualism again. This is literally just what we've been talking about on this channel for literally months now, but put into words from a study, data. It's kind of hilarious that it's the same thing, but continuing down like the shared trait overlaps, because again, I don't actually believe that you can be an authoritarian and be on the left. I think that that is fundamentally conflicting with being on the left. And I think that this is why I also don't consider non-progressive liberals, because progressive liberals I do consider to be part of the left, but just like the average of the Democratic Party, I don't consider to be on the left. Would be because of dangerous world schema, interpreting society as high risk or hostile. You see this as true both in the right and generally broadly in the world. Most people think that society is more hostile today interpersonally. Now, society is more hostile broadly, but interpersonally, that's not necessarily true, especially when you're not talking about the United States, and especially when you're talking about people that are engaging with their own community. Cognitive rigidity, struggle to update beliefs or tolerate ambiguity. People fucking hate ambiguity. Is it this or that? They cannot handle that. Most people can't. Preference for strong authority during perceived threat or instability. This goes back to right-wingers being submissive. Right-wing authoritarians want someone to protect them. They are afraid and they need that protection. And so submitting to a perceived strong authority to protect them is the way that they always have gone. That's like clear in fascism, at least from like the beginning of the analysis. Black and white thinking, us versus them thinking. Every right-winger is incapable of being changed. That kind of thinking, when we're talking about like from the left view or from the right view, is every liberal is insane from their view. Willingness to endorse political violence, but targets differ. This is absolutely the case. Both left-wing authoritarian and right-wing authoritarianism is linked to reduced dorsal-medial prefrontal cortex volume, rigid social cognition, altered insula, specifically decrease in that anterior insula, anxiety and emotions, and the lower ability to monitor threats, to be able to pay attention to what you're talking to be able to actually understand the arguments that you're having. Authoritarianism is tied into anxiety, as we've seen, and to mitigate this, you can see critical thinking education. Building tolerance for ambiguity is step number one. Is everything doesn't need to have an answer. It's okay to be nuanced. It's okay to be, going through a topic and exploring all sides of it. And even if one side of what you're exploring doesn't necessarily make sense, or it's not, fully backed by data, like it's still worth looking at and analyzing and thinking about. And the ability to do this, but not only just the ability, but the desire to critically think, is part of not being an authoritarian. Reducing black and white thinking. Dialogue, supporting honest cross-group interventions, conversations, and to break echo chambers, to intervene in that when you see it in people on your side. I think there should be more left-wing interventions of messaging that is authoritarian but comes from the left when you see it. The way that Trump's brain works with insults, name-calling, telling lies, all of it jammed up his opponents in the first run. People don't know how to respond to him. And it's because of this, though. It's because people don't know how to respond to, violence that's not violent. Violence that's verbal. Honestly, the other bit of it is that Donald Trump is genuinely funny in some of his insults. Didn't he call Ted Cruz's wife like a dog wife back in 2016? Like, I'm so like, it's bad. Don't do that. I don't like it. It's a horrible thing to say, but it was objectively funny to hear on stage, Guru bros are always tapping into it, but it's also, I suspect, a strange reason why a lot of crystal-loving health gurus also end up on the right. Oh, absolutely. I would go so far as to say that they go through this specific pipeline. They go through the left-wing authoritarianism pipeline. I've said this before, but many, many, many people that we would have considered hippies 2 decades ago, they counterculture, they like crystals and tarot cards and astrology, and would go to like Woodstock back in the 70s, ended up on the right. Even think about people who were activists, who were pro-gay rights, just queer liberation way back in the day, ended up on the right because of this, because of the same issues of fear, anxiety, of trauma, and of stress, chronic amounts of stress, as well as some people having a predisposition to this type of behavior. Naomi Klein's book was big on this when the hippies flipped to the right hard after COVID. Which book? The one after COVID. Oh, I know the one you're talking about. The Mirror World one. The one that she most recently wrote about people confusing her with Naomi Wolf. That was a good-ass book. Doppelganger, yes, that was what it was called. But, you see that, yeah, 100%. This stays with us the whole time. This is part of the reason why, we have TERFs in the first place. Because the idea of TERFs, not ever in, reality, by the way, that was all manufactured, but, the idea was starting from a perspective of, this is feminism. And that's how you get the left-wing people to agree to authoritarianism. The interesting thing about the study is its universality. The data set is Spanish citizens, and yet it applies anywhere. Imagine using US citizens as the cohort. I would love to see that. And yeah, even with the small subset of the, Spanish citizens that they use. They use 100 young Spanish boys, not even girls. But yeah, the universality of this is it applies so broadly and so clearly that it's objectively some of this is right. Some of it might just be, correlative, but some of this is causative. Trauma-informed care, addressing the root anxieties, not just the surface politics, a thing that we literally will never do under our current system because the current system benefits those in power. Not addressing the surface politics benefits those in charge. Economic safety nets, reducing precarity and baseline threat, reducing poverty. Because reducing poverty gets rid of crime. Reducing crime gets rid of anxiety about crime. Reducing, poverty gets rid of violence to an extent when it comes to crime, which then reduces fear. It reduces domestic violence, which then also reduces fear and anxiety and so on and so on. This is generational trauma shit being constantly reactivated through these means by all of the media that you engage with from the beginning of your day till the end, even on the left. And that's where I'm going to bring this to in a minute, because there are implications here in messaging from the left that we could change, that I'm learning from. But finally, build community, strengthen support networks to counter isolation. Again, directly from, the data, and to broaden mental health and social security access, prevention, not just treatment. Yeah, blah, 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 blah. It's the same thing. It's reduce poverty. When people flip from left to far right like that, it is my suspicion that their basis in the left was never material. It was a vague sense of freedom, free-spiritedness. In fact, that's the root of so many people on the right. Why to us it feels like that they don't believe in reality. The reality is that the vague sensations of freedom, journey, narrative, mythology, whereas the left is very focused on the material world. Absolutely. And I agree. The right just sees material benefits as handouts and that cheapen the sense of the journey. And really, in the ideal sense, I would agree if we didn't live in a, system that required material benefits to be considered. If those were standard, then yes, increasing some people's material benefits over others would be cheapening the journey. But from their perspective, it already is fixed. Everything's fine. The system works perfectly. There's no issues. There is no exploitation from their point of view. And that's why it's okay for them. I think it would be important to study the effects of cults versus this data. That would be incredibly interesting to look at. I think that it would stay pretty consistent because most of what makes a cult and how cults message to people they want to join their cult are essentially the same thing. Cults thrive hard on that mythological narrative shit. It's the same thing. The right is a cult, and so is the tanky left, which again is just the right, because the data shows that there is a direct correlation between the brains of left-wing authoritarians and the brains of right-wing authoritarians that left-wing non-authoritarians have the opposite of. There is an increase in your interior insula. There's an increase in the thickness of your insula in your brain when you are non-authoritarian and progressive. And so the opposite of that, when you're authoritarian and on the left, just shows that that fits better with the right than it does with the left, because you have still the decrease in your dorsomedial prefrontal cortex to consider. And then if you look at this from the Marxist lens, capitalist economies often drive alienation, insecurity, social atomization, which is what they have done. This is the society that we live in. That's what produced all of this. The economic stress of job loss, of precarity, of inequality, of wages, of paying your rent, and of having the ability to organize for your labor. All of this is part of the risk here. Brains are weird, man. People are weird. Weird is subjective perspective on any given subject. And weird, I think, is a positive thing. Some people see weird as a bad thing. It's interesting how language also plays into this, because part of it is, for mitigation and resistance, dialogue honest cross group conversations and critical thinking, the language around that increases your ability to move out of the authoritarian pipeline, whereas like echo chambers 100% increase your risk of ending up in the pipeline. Heightened insecurity primes people to seek certainty, order, and strong leadership. If you are afraid, if you don't know what's coming next, then you're more likely to look to somebody to tell you that. Authoritarian movements thrive when material conditions worsen, not just when political culture shifts. And they are worsening the material conditions, as well as shifting the political culture. And so being able to express this is important in a way that doesn't get people to stop paying attention, in a way that doesn't start having you doom spiraling. We need to be able to explain this to people who now we can verify via data are dumber, have less cognitive ability, have a difficulty in understanding the conversation that they're having, especially when they're having an argument. Heightened threat reactivity, so you have to make them feel calm, that it's not a threat. You know, they're looking for all kinds of threats everywhere where there don't exist any. They haven't, like, a lacking ability to do moral reasoning, so obviously, like, we've seen clear indications that trying to like be moral in the messaging of do this because it's the right thing doesn't work with these people. They don't have that. They have fears of disorder, threat sensitivity, and desire for stability. So frame it through who you're talking to and what works for them. Id, ego, superego, subconscious, conscious, conscientious, instinct, passion, reason. Most of the world is still stuck in the middle of conscientious and are the minority. Yeah, absolutely. And systemic change, security, healthcare, social support, plus personal care are needed to reduce the authoritarian drift, which, how do you do that if they're already in power? If they have done the opposite of this, it will increase the authoritarian drift. We're going to see that. And to be able to reverse it, we need to do these things that we need power for. So right now, I really do think the only way forward, and like we've talked a bit about this in a joking way, and I don't mean this as a broad political strategy. I mean this interpersonally, one-to-one. I mean you to your right-wing neighbor, you to your right-wing parents, your brother, your sibling, your cousins, your uncle, whatever it is. Someone that you can understand through this lens. Apply these lessons to your conversations with them and move them over. Whether you have to like lie to them, whether you have to frame it manipulatively, I don't care. I don't care. Now, you could say that's left-wing authoritarian, but you got to remember that all of this is written from the perspective that we don't already live in fascism and we're literally trying to not die because these people want to literally kill all of us. And these people are literally like insane. Like they're too far gone down the doom hole that they're coming up on the other side of the lake on this side. So like realistically, you could just put that over there and then, yeah. Ideally, before they take power, I think that's that the left has to find ways to speak to the mythological nature of the authoritarian mind. Absolutely. I don't know how to do this with the right. That's on an interpersonal level, like, you should be framing these points to them of like cognitive flexibility, emotional regulation, empathy, free expression, the things that we talk about from the perspective of what they're terrified of. Like not doing this will cause their fears is the best way to go about it. By not learning how to control their emotions, to regulate their emotions. How to like talk about this, by the way, is important because the words that we use are going to be from the left. Like, you know, you have to talk about this in the way that, like, the boys at the bar Friday night after, like, 7 drinks could handle, you know? You want to talk about this where, like, the average person at a NASCAR track could have a conversation about it. So, like, you have to dumb it down to a level that is at least a starting point. And that's why I'm saying do this interpersonally with people that you know in real life. I have some ideas. Please feel free to share. And let us know if they work, if you try them. But the overall basis of these 2 papers is that the ways to mitigate authoritarianism is critical thinking, emotional regulation skills, dialogue, trauma care, building economic safety nets, having community in person, and obviously like changing policies that produce this kind of effect.